did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to House of Asher.
And welcome back, everybody. This is House of Asher. I am your host, Steve Asher, and this is episode 54 of what hopefully is going to be an ongoing series. So far, I've been very lucky to speak with a lot of very interesting characters, very learned people, and sometimes the stuff I touch on maybe has more of a bit of an entertainment angle in regards of maybe somebody from a show, maybe somebody from a movie, maybe somebody from, man, I would interview the guy who did the voice of Slimer. I don't care. I want to touch on a lot of media-related stuff, but there's some stuff that kind of touches on things that ties into my childhood. Little things, little fears, little curiosities. Well, this is one of them. When I was a kid, I used to sometimes, and still sometimes do, experience something called sleep paralysis. And the guest that we have on is the man. He knows all about this. He is the go-to guy. He is the dude. And the dude is a Mr. Brian Sharpless, and I want to do a very quick intro. This gentleman is an associate professor, a licensed clinical psychologist. He ain't no lightweight. Okay, this is a PhD, son. I'm talking about this man has it on lock. It's just a fact. He's presented his work everywhere. He's UK, Spain, Sweden, the Czech Republic. This guy is a very, very interesting man, a very knowledgeable man, but a very down-to-earth fellow. I'm going to do like a little quick intro in regards of what he does and what he studies. Sleep paralysis is mainly characterized by the inability to move, conscious awareness in sleep, coupled with vivid hallucinations. Has a history that spans over 2,000 years. However, despite this expansive history, it is only in recent times that a scientific evidence base has occurred. Now, humans throughout history have described the particular state between wakefulness and sleep during which they are consciously aware of their surroundings, but physically paralyzed. Sleep paralysis is also commonly accompanied with high levels of fear, feelings of suffocation, hallucinations, of waking, commonly accompanied with different waking dreams, and people would even connect this with actual attacks by benevolent spirits, demons, ghosts, witches, and whatnot. And some of these beliefs persist even into to present day in the forms of nocturnal visitations by extraterrestrials, shadow people, various types of amalgamations of the human mind and folklore. And sleep paralysis, historical, physiological, and medical perspectives, offers the first comprehensive examination of sleep paralysis from scientific and cultural perspectives. Man, that was a mouthful. Let me introduce Mr. Brian A. Sharpless. Hey, Brian, welcome to the show.
Hi, happy to be here, Steve.
Man.
That sounded a lot like the back of my book.
Yeah, surprisingly like the back of your book, didn't it? Well, I wanted to get, it's one of those things that I don't usually try to, just remill somebody's stuff, but this is your own words, because I know from writing your own descriptions, it's like, well, what's it about? Here, just read the back of the book, and
yeah.
It's your own words. Who's better to describe it than you?
Sounds good.
Man, I want to thank you for being on. It's so crazy that, again, we're roughly from the same time and growing up and everything, and I never realized how vast this was until I really started checking out some of your seminars and reading some of your work. It really is a human condition that has really shaped, art, the superstitions that people have, popular culture, even little things that people wouldn't even think of, like people putting horseshoes on houses. Everybody thought that used to be for good luck, but more often than not, it was to ward off spirits that that would bother you in your sleep.
Yeah, it's crazy. You start looking at the smallest little thing, and you start looking at it pretty carefully, and then you see it ties into so many other aspects of human life, culture, history. Yeah, I was pretty shocked by where the book ended up going too.
Yeah. Well, and it's so crazy. I actually forgot to say this because I was trying to not mangle that, fail. But I was going to say that, and jokingly, that you do body double work for the singer from Weezer, because the particular picture that I had, you have the cap and the glasses, and you look like you just come out of, wherever, man. You probably got your little latte or something in hand and getting ready to do something extremely cool in the city. But I did want to say again, as I kind of mentioned you a little bit off air, you get into a lot of folks. Okay, this is very true of the paranormal too. You get some people that are very down to earth and very self-aware and can kind of joke off stuff. And you got some people that are like just dead serious. And
yeah, on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah,
the believers and the skeptics. Yeah,
right. And don't get me wrong, I've told folks before that, coming up, having some different experiences with, the paranormal and, sleep paralysis and all kinds of just crazy stuff. When you're a kid, you're kind of a full-on believer. And then you get older, and especially if you start doing research and things like that, you have to make yourself skeptical. And then the older that you get, certain things become, well, you start believing a little bit more in things that you keep finding more and more data that leads itself and lends itself to the validity of something. It's just like with any scientific method, you have to show a continued repeat of the same sort of stimuli and the same sort of controlled test and stuff, and you're having things going back and forth, pegging on in the same areas, same numbers. It's hard to write that off. And so, but one of the things, again, like I said, is the fact that you come at this in a way that it's not, because I guess the stuff that I was reading of yours, I was thinking, man, this guy's really, really on it. It's going to be extremely over my head. But you put it out in a way that it's for everybody. It's not that it's lowbrow in any way. It's very, very deep reading, but you put it in a way that's obtainable by the layman, and it's also fun. Like I said, in the stuff that I saw of your where you would have lectures and whatnot, and it's pretty funny.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is a lot of people that have sleep paralysis and other strange disorders, it really freaks them out. And so they go through their lives thinking maybe they're going crazy, maybe there's something really wrong with them. And so they don't talk to their doctors about it. They don't ask professionals about it. So they end up going through their lives having these fears. So one of the main reasons I wanted to write that book was to make it accessible so people could realize, well, they're not the only one. And actually about 8% of the population has at least once. And if you're a college student, you have it a lot more. If you have certain types of anxiety and other kinds of psychiatric conditions, it makes it even more likely that you have it. So, I like to try to make things that are understandable by just about anybody.
Well, something that, and I'm not sure if I actually had sent this to you on Facebook or not, but we were talking about how, well, as you learn and as you discover, it's on a curve. When people are coming, especially from earlier times, medieval times and beyond, it makes me think of the old SNL sketch, well, what's wrong with him? Well, it's obvious. He has ghosts in his blood. Bring the leeches, and they have all these horrific ways of trying to get these, what they think are demons or some sort of things in their, I remember you were talking about one of the problems was someone thought that they had too much blood.
Yeah. That was believed to be a cause of the nightmare and being visited by all these things. So there's nothing, as you know, that can't be cured by good bleeding. So, yep. So yeah, I mean, if you the people back in medieval times, they weren't stupid. They were being very logical based on the beliefs that they had. So if you believe that certain things are caused by too much blood, too much bile, too much what have you, you get rid of it. If it's caused by too little of something, you give the person more of it. So these things make sense. It's just unfortunate that some of the premises were wrong.
Right. Well, I mean, it's almost, I don't want to say it's anecdotal, but it's a thing, like you said, sometimes people find connections in things. People by nature like to put things in boxes and say, okay, well, yeah, I'm on top of this. And sometimes, which obviously there's root causes to sleep paralysis, but especially some of the things that maybe are a little bit more esoteric, whatever, be it different sort of energies or different sort of this and that. I've never sat and thought that, even when I did research into ghosts or sacred places or whatnot, I never wanted to be like, oh, I'm a ghost hunter. I'm not, if you can't see me, I'm doing air quotes. And okay, this is great for radio, air quotes. I never wanted to be a ghost hunter. I just wanted to be a researcher. Like I tell people, I don't have ghost heads on my wall. I don't have a stuffed ghost on my mantle. To me, that's, how do you quantify something like that? But in the sort of work that you do, it's amazing that you have taken things that historically have been the cause of not just fear and panic and superstitions. It's been, I mean, people have been put to death. I mean, people would, and we can definitely talk about this more, to the details of it in a minute, but I know we were, one of the things you talked about was the Salem witch trials, and there was I'm losing the woman's name. A guy said that he had visited by a woman, Mrs. Bishop, right, and said, well, she come there and she was sitting on my chest and she was strangling me. And I remember you saying, I'm pretty sure you can figure out what happened to Miss Bishop. Yeah, she was hung. And that is not only shows, and people, I think more people often than not go, oh, well, that just shows how primitive these people. They're not that primitive. We aren't that far removed from these people, and
their brains are just as big as ours.
Right, and it's just people in fear, and especially back in again, like I said, because I watched your lectures, talking about how at one time they thought this stuff was contagious, and so they would have to either isolate or do something to these people to keep that from spreading. It's wild. Well, let me ask you something, because we were discussing a little bit off air about what I like to call your Batman origin story. Everyone comes to something due to something. Maybe somebody became a cancer researcher because they lost their Grammy to lymphoma, or this guy became a cop because their cousin or sister or somebody was attacked by somebody. What brought you to this? Was it just studying other type of like neurologically connected issues, or did you always have an interest in sleep paralysis? What happened?
Yeah, believe it or not, a lot of people, I think, go into psychological research, and it's really me-search. I actually didn't have sleep paralysis until about 8 years after I started studying it. But if you look back when I was a kid, I was always into weird stuff. So one of the first books I read was this little purple book called Monsters that took you through Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, all that stuff. My mom bought it for me when I was a kid. And I was always watching Search Of and all those, those good Nat Geo shows on paranormal things. So I was always into that. And as I got older and was in high school, I started realizing that I wanted to be a psychologist. I think a lot of people, they say, why, you ask them why they're becoming a psychologist. They say to help people. I think that was part of it. But to be honest, I really found people fascinating, and I really wanted to try and figure out what makes people tick. So I started studying anxiety disorders, primarily when I was in grad school. And when I was on postdoc in Philly, I was working on a panic disorder study. And at the time, people thought that sleep paralysis might actually be an African-American variant of panic disorder. So I was in Philly, which is a majority black city. I'm on a panic disorder study. So I was like, look, why don't we check this out? So I couldn't find too many good measures out there. So I constructed an interview, and everybody that was taking part in the study got this interview on sleep paralysis. So that's how I actually collected the first bit of data on sleep paralysis, and then it sort of took off from there. I never have written other things that have sort of gotten as much attention from the public as with sleep paralysis and exploding head syndrome, which is another thing we can maybe talk about later. But the public seems really fascinated by it, not only because it's kind of a weird thing, but it's also fairly common, so a good chunk of your audience has probably had it at least once. And then when you tie in all the sexy, vampires, witches, demons, alien abduction stories, it's pretty fun stuff, especially around Halloween.
Sure. Well, you can't forget the fairies and all the wee people that tie into, which almost late, like you said, if you impose an alien abduction with a fairy visitation or some sort of goblin abduction, it mirrors it almost 9 times out of 10 on the points.
Yeah, I was shocked at how close they were. Even some people were using the same things to try and ward off the fairies or the UFO aliens, like iron and salt. So 2,000 years, they're still using the same substances to ward off these creatures.
Well, I mean, it's one of these things. It depends on where you're at. Growing up, I always felt very connected to nature. And maybe part of that is just growing up in a kind of a lakeland area. There's a lot of lakes and valleys and hills and whatnot. And there were just like you had mentioned as well, there's times you just kind of got to pull back and get back into nature. You got to ground yourself a little bit, which I never realized that's what I was doing, until I started kind of researching more kind of esoteric and metaphysical things, which I think people are rediscovering things. I don't think a lot of stuff that maybe, and of course, I'm not necessarily talking about Atlantis and this and that, but I do think that we had lost so much history and so much knowledge through times like the Middle Ages and whatnot. That we lost so much in regards of just common knowledge and even probably medical, that the things that we're coming across now, like you said, we're probably just rediscovering it. But the thing is, you're talking about the interest that people have in it. There's a reason for that. Even this goofy little thing that I'm doing here, this little show, I was really surprised because I didn't know what I would get from local folks here, because it's not Mayberry, but it's a very working class southern town. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, either the reaction will be benign, or they're gonna, tar and feather me and carry me out like in that scene on Oh Brother Where Art Thou or something. But surprisingly, and I think part of it is the fact that, you come at it in a way, you're not, you're kind of self-deprecating, and you sort of throw a little humor into it, to where people can kind of absorb it and have a little laughter, to where it's not just, if you just pour too much on somebody, they're after a while they're going to glaze over. And that's what I try to do with my show too, of going, look, here's this, here's that. We can have a laugh, take it as a little entertainment if you can get something out of it. I mean, I'm obviously not a doctor, but it's one of those things. It's like, oh, it's great. I like to have people on that obviously that are learned people, or have done research in this and that, or whatever, written about this and that. And the fact that, again, you come at it in such a way, I think it makes people very compelled to you and to the subject matter. Because sometimes I've often used this expression, you'll quickly learn that I speak in movie quotes and dark meme conversations. Ray, you're scaring the straights. You have to come out a way to go, look, let's talk about it loose. This is, nothing's locked, nothing's in stone. Let's open it up. And then once people can kind of go, oh, well, if we're just talking conjecture, well, blah, blah, blah. And then discourse opens. And then, the folded arms go down, and then they open up. And then that's when you find out, I never realized, and until I started, researching some of your work and stuff, just how common it was. I never thought that a large swath of the community, especially throughout history, had this. I mean, I knew there was the night, the night hag syndrome and things like that. I did want to ask you one thing, and because I don't want to monopolize this, and I wanted to to explain more about the actual condition. Now, I worked a lot of midnights, primarily because, as I told you off air, we had special needs children. There was a lot of doctor's trips. It was a lot easier for me to work midnights, catch sleep either in the afternoon after a visit, or early morning before an afternoon visit. Now, I know I had other people who worked midnight shifts who seemed to have seemingly a higher quotient of that situation, or at least as much as someone who would sleep at night. Because I always thought, well, it's a night thing. It has to happen at night. But is it just it's not necessarily a nocturnal. It's just when that person's personal circadian rhythms are kicking, and if you're normal in the daytime, that's when you're going to have it, or if it's normal at nighttime, is when it's going to have it. Or am I wrong on this?
Nah, you're right on. And I think folks that have work like swing shift and things like that, they're actually putting themselves at greater risk than sleep paralysis, because unfortunately, you're kind of going against your body's natural rhythms when you do late nights and things like that, or even if you're jet lagged from taking a long trip. Anything that disrupts your sleep is going to put you at greater risk for sleep paralysis. So the only time that I had sleep paralysis, I actually was flying from the UK to Washington State, so it was a really long flight.
Yeah.
And had a glass of wine on the plane, maybe a glass of wine when I got home, and all those things sort of made it increasingly likely, and lo and behold, I ended up having an episode. First one ever. And I realized when I was having it, when I was seeing a shadowy figure, I was like, oh my god, you're having sleep paralysis. This is so freaking cool. So, yeah, that was my experience. But most people that have it, they're pretty terrified. But, yeah.
Well, let me ask you, that strikes me as extremely compelling. As I told you a little bit, I'd worked in prison systems for a while, 10 years, that and law enforcement related stuff. And when I went in there, I had already had an interest in the facility, knew a little bit about the history and tales of ghosts and shadowy figures, which you see waking hours. And so I'm like, okay, so I treated it as my little kind of Geraldo undercover. Man, how's that for an old reference? Like an old kind of like a go in.
He's still around. I saw him on Fox the other day.
Is he? How's he doing? But it's one of those things of going in and being somewhat aware. It's almost like, okay, you're treating it like a video game. Okay, I know that I should probably deal with this. I mean, so what I'm saying is, when that hits you, was it like, ooh, I got the golden ticket. I actually get to take the ride. And how did you deal with that?
Well, it was kind of funny because, as I said, this stuff gets a lot of attention from newspaper reporters, TV shows, and things like that. So people would always ask me, so, Dr. Sharpless, have you ever had sleep paralysis? Assuming that I have it all the time, and that's why I study it. And I say, no, I never did, but I can't wait till I do. So once I finally had it, I was like, I was actually a little bit disappointed because I couldn't use that bad joke. But I was kind of excited because then I got to actually experience it, so I'd have a better sense of what it was like for my patients that have reported it and the people I study. So, it was definitely a good thing to experience. And it wasn't that scary for me.
Well, see, that's the next thing I was going to ask you is that, like, okay, now I've had dreams where, all right, I hadn't told you. You knew that we had 2 sons that we had adopted. Our oldest son had passed away about 3 years ago due to a seizure, and I had some. Well, it really wasn't exactly. Well, dang, I don't know how to describe it exactly to you. There was an element of sleep paralysis involved, but I know that in these dreams, sometimes you see human people, and sometimes it's people you know, and sometimes it's people that have passed. And this was probably within about a month and a half. But I realized that what was going on. I didn't realize it was like a paralysis, but I did realize, honestly, I think I didn't care because I was like, oh, my son's here, we're going to hang out. So we spent a day, we went and ran around and whatever, and then I woke up, and then I was like, man, and I tried to go back to sleep because I wanted more of that. I really want, and then I couldn't, and I was really frustrated. When you had this, like, did you sort of like derail some of like the experience? Because I know a lot of times people have I forgot what it's called when you're not able to breathe, and you start having that kind of feedback of going, okay, I can't breathe, I'm choking, I'm dying, and it heightens that. Due to the fact that you were able to go, nah, I know what this is. Did it sort of almost like the boogeyman come and said, you're no fun, and it took off? Was it a thing that did you have like what you would consider the classic paralysis, or did you kind of starve it off due to the fact that you didn't go through all the different stages of it, due to the fact that you had sort of an inside look of how this plays out?
Yeah, I had all the symptoms that were required for it to be a sleep paralysis episode, but looking back at the way it's been talked about through most of human history, I didn't have the scary version. The old way of viewing it was you would have a paralysis, you would have high levels of fear, and you would have a feeling of pressure in your chest, which was usually accompanied by a hallucination that there was something on top of you. So I just had the paralysis, the awareness of the paralysis, and saw the hallucinations, but it actually wasn't scary because I knew what it was. But if I didn't know what it was, and I would have seen what I saw, which was this sort of looked like a ninja mask wearing person with red eyes and then a long neck like a giraffe, and my door swung open, which was a hallucination because when I woke up it was still closed, and I saw this face, and then the face looked at me, and then it started coming closer to me to the point it looked like it had a 7-foot-long neck. So if I had no idea what the hell sleep paralysis was and I saw that, I'd be pretty freaked out. But I was just looking at it and I was like, that's pretty interesting. So so it wasn't quite as bad, fortunately.
So, okay, when did you piece together that basically Jeffrey was like a spirit ninja and he was coming to get you?
Right. At first I woke up and I was lying on my back and my girlfriend was beside me and I was looking up, and then I just caught a hint of movement over to my left. So I looked over there and I realized I couldn't move, but I could move my eyes, which is normal in sleep paralysis. And so that's when my door started slowly swinging open, almost as like someone was blowing on it, making it go really slow. Then I saw light beaming in from the hallway window, and then I saw the face. And that's when I realized it was sleep paralysis. I thought for a minute it might be a burglar or something, but yeah.
It sounds like an episode of X-Files or something, or honest to God, man. Well, let me ask you, I mean, because you've really went all out. I mean, you went really in depth on what from carrying it in from history and all that. And how, do you want to give a few examples of how this was misconstrued, at least, in your research? Because, I mean, understand there's still people that very much believe, maybe not, I won't say believe, but feel that they are experiencing something paranormal on them. I had actually watched a show, and it talked about, the reason I think about this, I actually had some people in our town from Hungary, and I think possibly from Romania, and I had seen a show where they were talking about beliefs and whatnot, and there were some people in certain small areas, that's just the nature of it, little isolated areas where if someone dies in a certain way or whatever, they will put a spike or some sort of thing. I mean, they've found skeletons, with a brick in its mouth and all that kind of stuff because of a fear of something's returning. How does that tie in with some of the sleep paralysis myths or beliefs, tying in with the paranormal?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. There are lots of connections. Believe it or not, there are still a number of people today, and from my perspective, this isn't shocking. I don't think they're stupid. I don't think they're backwards. But there are a good number of people that still will sort of believe that this isn't just a natural event, some weird blip in your sleep cycle, but they are actually being visited. There's a great documentary called The Nightmare, which was directed by Rodney Asher, where he actually uses Hollywood special effects to recreate the people's hallucinations when they're in sleep paralysis. And while he's talking with them about sleep paralysis, so they're aware of the fact that there is this thing out there, this medical condition. But the vast majority of the people in the documentary still believe that it's a paranormal event happening. And I totally get that. I'm not a scoff dick and think that these people are just being idiots. I don't believe that at all. These experiences are so powerful for people, and they're so scary, and they're so sort of at odds with what they experience normally, that it makes sense that they would believe it. But unfortunately, the things that they experience aren't real. So in a classical sleep paralysis episode, you're either going to sleep or waking up, and the first thing you notice is you can't move. But you see everything like you would normally. So you can see your alarm clock over to the right of you. You can see your bedroom. You can see your curtains on the walls, your decorations. But along with that, you can't talk. You can't cry out for help. And then a good chunk of folks, probably like 70-80%, have hallucinations. So you're seeing things that aren't there in combination with things that actually are there. And for the people that experience hallucinations of other people, other beings, animals, it's terrifying. You've got some intruder in your bedroom that's talking to you, possibly saying really mean things to you, and potentially attacking you. So I totally get that people believe they're real, especially if you don't have a solid understanding of why it's happening. And if you look through time, they've talked about this since ancient Greece. There was an experience they called Pan-ephialtes, which means the god Pan leaping upon you. So that's how the ancient Greeks would experience sleep paralysis. If you're in China, you might have what's called ghost depression. I won't try to mangle the Chinese term for it, but it's called ghost depression. If you're in Zanzibar, they'd call it the Popobawa. This was a really weird one. The Popobawa was a giant black bat that would come out from the jungle, and it tended to only attack men. And it wouldn't just attack them, it would actually sexually assault them. And if you were visited by the Popobawa, you had to tell someone else that the Popobawa attacked you, or it'd come back and attack you again.
That almost has like
an
a
interesting one.
Well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interject. I'm sorry, but I was thinking. Remember, what was the movie where they had the tape and you watched it and you had to have somebody else to watch it, or it wouldn't?
Yeah, The Ring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got shades of that. You know, something I was going to ask you too, real quick, and we can get back to some more different classic examples. I know that there's sleep paralysis, and I know when people are in the processes of dying, they will have like near-death experiences, and there's also something called not NDEs, but out-of-body experiences. And I know a lot of people talk about showing similar sensations, sort of almost like a. I'm trying to think of the word, like almost like a tremor. They feel a tremor, or maybe like a very loud pop, sort of like the exploding head syndrome, and it would lead me to think that they had to somehow be tied into the same sort of physiological and psychological, roots. They have to have some sort of similar mechanics, because it seems like some of the side effects and symptoms and after effects of it are very similar.
Yeah, well, out-of-body experiences are not that uncommon in sleep paralysis. So you will hear sometimes people seeing their body from outside themselves. So this is called autoscopy. And it's kind of like you can see yourself from the ceiling looking down on yourself in bed. So you can hear that sometimes. That occurs during one of the three subtypes of hallucinations called vestibular motor. So people that have that will oftentimes also feel that they're flying. They feel that they're floating. They feel that their bodies are being moved around without them actually moving it. So these can be pretty scary, but some people really enjoy them. There's a small percentage of people that have sleep paralysis that enjoy it. They actually look forward to it and try to get into it so they can fly around and have all these strange experiences while they have conscious awareness. So in terms of the near-death experiences, I haven't researched that quite as closely, but pretty much anytime anything strange happens to a person, they try to make sense of it. And they make sense of it using the understandings and the categories that they have. So if we were in, 13th century France, where the Catholic Church and a lot of beliefs in, demons, things like that are being talked about all the time, we have a strange sleep experience, we might think, well, hey, we're visited by a demon. Or we start sensing that there's a presence in the room. Our brain will organize that sensation into a demon. And I think we probably do a similar thing when we're having those near-death experiences, when all our neurons are firing because there's no oxygen coming to them. So, and right now, if you look in 21st century America, not a lot of people are, talking about demons all that much. But if we're thinking in terms of, technologically advanced aliens, or maybe interdimensional shadow people that Stephen Hawking has even talked about, that might seem a bit more reasonable explanation, especially if you don't have sort of a scientific way of understanding, well, why am I seeing this stuff when I know I'm not asleep? Why am I experiencing this? So that might make more sense.
Well, I mean, it's so funny because, like you said, it's one of these deals where touching into this, and due to the fact that you sort of come at it, at least in my view, again, I'm making an assumption, but you take in that human element of it, and it's you have to kind of, like you said, give it a little bit of room, because, like you said, there are so many different cultures that have, as part of maybe their religious rites and things like that, and have voodoo culture and things like that, and believe in a whole lot of different stuff, and people having spirit journeys, and having spirits going into them, and having these, like you said, being above the body and seeing what's going on below you. It's got to be very strange, because I know, like you said, you want to be understanding of different cultures, and you want to be understanding of different people's religious beliefs and stuff. But on the takeaway of it, have you ever had someone maybe from whatever various religious sect or whatever that you have interviewed, and due to the fact that they say maybe are Catholic or something like that, when they have some of this, they maybe have angel visitations, or maybe someone who has something connected to some other religion or whatever have something like that. And I'm on the counter of that, I'm curious if maybe someone who is a complete atheist or something was maybe a little taken back. Maybe they had something like that, or do they have a completely kind of flat line, pardon the pun, but just like a very normal, just scary sleep paralysis?
Yeah, I think those sort of pre-existing beliefs do tend to color the sleep paralysis experience. So if you look at the core features of sleep paralysis, we have a fairly good understanding down to the neurotransmitters that are involved in what makes us paralyzed. But even though the sort of physiological experience is the same, that interpretive, that cultural element seems to really differ. So you see people that might have pre-existing beliefs in certain aspects of the supernatural experiencing in that way. So if you really believe in UFOs, and frankly, I'm a skeptic for a lot of things. I don't disbelieve at all that there could be life on other planets. I would guess that there is, but that's different from having, a bunch of alien abductions going back to the 1950s. So I think that's less probable than just the idea that there's something else out there, to go back to X-Files. So, you see it coloring it. I remember working with, interviewing a student, and she was very much a goth kind of girl. And her experience of sleep paralysis was being visited by a little girl vampire who was dressed in goth and was had a lot of really severe goth makeup on, and was trying to drag her off the bed. From other cultures, I've seen them experience the sleep paralysis hallucinations in ways that are in line with their culture. And even atheists. I'm a non-believer myself, and I saw essentially a shadow person with a very long neck. So a shadow person that, bred with some giraffe or something. So we tend to organize it in ways that make sense to us.
Well, there was a time, and the reason I brought up the shadow people thing, I was working, it was actually one of the times that I did have the paralysis. I was hearing something. It was sort of similar to the pop, but it wasn't really so much a pop. It was almost like I'm gonna do the sound, almost like a suction pop type sound.
Uh-huh.
And I woke up in our downstairs bedroom, and I just felt the presence of sort of like, you ever been like in your room asleep, and maybe your wife had just come, or a girlfriend, whatever, had just come in and just turned around and walked out, and you wake up and was like, somebody had just been in here. I can sense the sensation they were here, or maybe the door opening and closing changed the airflow or whatever. It was like that.
Yeah, sure.
And it was the weirdest thing, and it hadn't happened like that again, but it was a very standalone, odd situation. I was staring close to the bedroom door. It was an older, tall, like mahogany type door, and just to the left of it looked almost like a coat rack with like a bunch of kind of clothes with kind of like a hat on it, kind of cocked to the side. And I was like, well, why did my wife, her name was Cheyenne, said, why did Cheyenne bring the coat rack in here?
First, why is she wearing an Indiana Jones hat?
Why is it in here? And I was like, I don't have a hat like that. I was like, wait a minute, we don't have a coat rack. And as quick as it was said, it didn't fade out. It literally like went whoosh, into like descended sort of into the ground, like with like I'm melting, you know, that kind of thing. And it just went whoosh and almost like smoked out. So I jumped up, and let me say, you know, as a preface, you know, I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't any of that. I'm kind of a straight edge guy. So I kind of jumped up out of bed. Then I'm thinking somebody's in the house. So then I go into, you know, guard mode. I got my mitts up, looking around. What's going on? Looking under the bed, looking in the closet. Nothing. I go ask my wife. I was like, was somebody just here? Were you just in here? She's like, no. Why? I said, oh, okay. And then I start trying to troubleshoot it. Well, did somebody come to the door? Maybe a light could have cast through a crack in the door. She says, no. Why? I said, I just saw the weirdest thing. And she's like, no one's been here. No one's been at the door in hours. I've been here with the baby. She was, doing whatever in the kitchen. And it was really strange. And we had a time or two, when the kids might see a little something odd. But that was the first time, and about the only time, thankfully, that I ever saw anything that I would consider pretty much solid. And
yeah, sounds pretty scary too.
Oh, it was very surreal because, like you said, you're laying on your back. You have enough movement. You can move your eyes around. I could kind of move my head maybe 45 degrees either way, or maybe not, maybe more like 30 degrees. Just enough you can kind of span the room. And then it was done. And then, like I said, there was that sound that was with it. And I don't know if that was coming in or out of the paralysis or what. But as quick as it hit the ground, it was done. Like I said, I'm jumping up, looking around. And I wonder how much that ties in with accidental assaults, accidental attacks on somebody in the house, especially if somebody who's doesn't come out of the sleep before. Because as I mentioned, I'd had a sister, and we picked at her all the time about this years and years later. She would always have these dreams that Dracula was after her, and it was so funny. Because again, I'm not politically correct. Where we lived was considered, I guess, at the time the black section of town, and we lived there. We weren't black, so it wasn't the black section. But I would always joke with her and says, "Well, was it Blackula? Was it, like the Black Frankenstein, something like that?" And she's like, "No." So anyway, but she would literally jump up on the bed and like cut out through the house. She actually one time took off, still in the dream, took off down the street and running down Green Street, which is one of the little streets that we lived on. My dad had to come get her. I mean, she was still in the dream, and she wasn't on medication. But the grip of the whatever it was, the waking nightmare, was so strong. It's really weird. How often does that type of experience, or have you seen that sort of experience with that, tie in with accidents, assaults, different sort of crimes?
Yeah, that's a big question. So, in general, just to jump back a step, so with sleep paralysis, what's going on is you're having rapid eye movement sleep going on while you're awake. So pretty much if you look at the sleep disorders, a lot of them are these weird combination of states that shouldn't go together. So normally, when you're in REM sleep, you are paralyzed so that you can't act out your dreams, because as your sister could evidence, that could be pretty dangerous, could be pretty scary. And so we have in sleep paralysis that waking awareness, and we can look around the room and we can get things from all our five senses just like normal, but we can't move, and we're oftentimes having these dreams going on while we're awake. Since we're awake, they're hallucinations because they're not there. With REM behavioral disorder, you are asleep, you are having a dream, but you're not paralyzed. So that can be a very scary thing. And with people that have this, they oftentimes feel that they're being attacked in the dreams. So I saw this amazing video at a conference back in October of a man who is in a sleep lab. He was being taped, and he had all the EEG sensors on his head, and he was under the belief that he was being attacked by a pterodactyl. And since it was being videotaped, they were able to put in a fake CGI pterodactyl to show what it was doing to make the video make more sense. So yeah, with all the sleep disorders, you see this weird combination of states that shouldn't go together that are. And in terms of attacks, I haven't heard of the people with sleep paralysis attacking other people, but I have heard of cases of people who experienced sleep paralysis and believed that it was a real event. So you mentioned earlier how some people see recently deceased relatives or might see people that they know during the paralysis episodes. Given that about 80 to 90% of sleep paralysis episodes are scary, if you are having a belief, if you're having a hallucination of a relative in the room with you or somebody you know, they might do some pretty bad things to you. And if you're not aware of the fact that it's sleep paralysis and it feels just as real as everything else, you know, you're hearing things that just sound as real as my voice right now. You're seeing things that look just as real to you as you're listening to this radio show. It could be problematic, and people could think they were really assaulted when in actuality they had a sleep paralysis episode. So there are some cases that have been documented in the literature about that.
Well, you know, and what people don't think about too is, okay, well, they think, oh well, how scary is Grandma? How scary is whatever your favorite Aunt Betty or something? Well, what if it was creepy Uncle Ed? What if it was some old clergy guy that was weird with you when you was a kid and God forbid took advantage of you? Just because it's past doesn't mean that they were good folks, you know, and
no.
You know,
even if it is Granny, you're still paralyzed, and Granny can move. So, it can be really terrifying. And a number of the students that I worked with, a good percentage of them had their first sleep paralysis episodes shortly after a relative had died, and a good chunk of those saw their relative, except they weren't doing pleasant things. So, yeah, it's potentially dangerous. I was involved, I can't get into too many details about this, but I was involved in a court case involving an allegation of sexual abuse, and which was very consistent with sleep paralysis. So, it can happen. I think it's very, very rare that happens, and I think usually one of the nice things about sleep paralysis is that the hallucination immediately goes away as soon as movement returns to you, which ties in with some of the old vampire beliefs where the vampire would disappear as soon as the cock would crow, you know?
Right.
And it would kind of just magically go away. So it's like that with sleep paralysis hallucinations as well, that as soon as movement returns, they go away. So a lot of people that have them are like, well, I don't know what the hell just happened, but it was weird, but it's gone. So at least I know it wasn't real. But sometimes you might not, and if you really, again, if these hallucinations are very much in keeping with your pre-existing beliefs, you might think, well, geez, that I can't believe that really happened. I was just visited by a werewolf or a demon or a witch.
Well, two things. I have two questions about, one's going to tie in with sleep apnea, and also some of the things you're mentioning about Montague Summers. But let me ask you real quick, where can people, first of all, get your books? When's your next seminars coming up? Let's throw out some web pages so these guys can get with you.
More than happy to plug. All my books go out through Oxford University Press, so you can order them directly through there, or on Amazon. They carry them as well. I have two out right now. One's called Sleep Paralysis: Historical, Psychological, and Medical Perspectives, and that was co-authored with my good friend Carl de Gramsci, MD. Then I have a book called Unusual and Rare Psychological Disorders that came out last year, and that has a chapter on sleep paralysis. It goes through exploding head syndrome, sexsomnia, which is people that have sex while they're asleep, and then it goes into some of the more interesting cultural disorders like dots and Koro. Koro is a real fun one. It's where you believe that certain sensitive body parts are shrinking, and once they shrink completely inside your body, you die. So it's got a lot of interesting stuff that a lot of medical professionals don't even know about. So you can find that online as well. And I have a book coming out in February on a type of psychotherapy I do called psychodynamic therapy. And that is tentatively called Psychodynamic Therapy Techniques, a Guide to Expressive and Supportive Interventions. That's coming out in February. In terms of seminars, I'm giving one in Stockholm, Sweden in November, but nothing scheduled in the States in the near future. I've got to get caught up on work.
Yeah, it never ends. Look, first of all, due to the fact that we both had mentioned we grew up with metal and punk, so many A, subject matter, B, some of the types of terminology like the exploding head syndrome, and what was the sex one?
Sexomnia or sexual behaviors while sleeping. They call it a few different names.
See, that sounds like a really heavy like German like industrial band.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
yeah.
Have you ever considered? Because like I said, I know you play as well. What instrument do you play?
I play lead guitar.
That's so metal. That is really great. Yeah. So did you like? And I will ask you some more of these other questions, but I will talk a little shop on that.
Yeah, sure.
Had you ever had in paralysis? Now, the reason I ask about this is some people say, well, I had this very vivid dream, I had this very whatever, but there was a piece of music to it, or there was a passage, and I started writing it down, and well, boom, it turned into a story, or boom, it turned into, the chorus for Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting or something. Have you ever heard of someone getting what they felt was, I mean, I'm sure it's subconsciously, but like a message?
Inspiration?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I've gotten that myself. And if you listen to interviews with musicians and authors, they will get inspiration from their sleep. By being Mary Shelley got Frankenstein from a dream she had.
Exactly. After
she ate too much before she went to bed. So absolutely. And in dreams I have, there's oftentimes a lot of music. And I also had a funny experience. I had what was called a hypnagogic hallucination. They're very normal, but that's the fancy term for hearing or seeing things that aren't there as you're going to sleep. So when I was probably about 14 or 15, my uncle turned me on to the Doors. So I became completely obsessed with Jim Morrison and the Doors. So I would go to bed every night listening to a cassette tape of the Doors' greatest hits. So as I'm going to bed one day, just about asleep, and I swear I heard Jim Morrison in the middle of one of their songs yell, "Brian!" And so I woke up in a start, and then I looked around my room, and everything was fine. But yeah, so I'd worked in what was going on around me into my hallucination. And that's really common. And you see that in sleep paralysis too, and in normal dreaming. There have been some really interesting studies where they put people in sleep labs, and while they're sleeping, they pump in, say, the smell of a flower or the smell of a food. And then they ask people the next morning what they dreamed of. And you can see how they work in those things that they experienced. Or maybe they'll play a noise. They'll put like some sort of vibrating noise going on while they're sleeping, and they'll have a dream that they're at the dentist's office getting a tooth drilled. So, yeah, we're not completely insensitive to what's going on around us, even when we're sleeping. We'll still tend to work in those experiences. You were talking about maybe if your wife comes in the room. If she did, you might work in someone coming in the room, friend or foe.
Yeah, true. I was going to ask you too, which it's just so funny. I thought you were going to tell me like she was like, "Brian, you have work to do," and he starts doing.
Yeah.
But just sound more like Elvis. It has my hey. Did you ever dream of Elvis? Maybe it's a message for you. But
I'm more of a Little Richard fan, but I do like Elvis.
That's okay. Man, I don't know. I like Little Richard too, but I come in there with a woo. That scared me. I don't think I'd be ready for that.
He's the best. People always say, "Are you an Elvis or a Beatles guy?" I always tell them I'm a Little Richard guy. He's fantastic. A really underrated singer. And yeah, hitting those squeals, not to get too nerdy on Guitar Shop, but it's like a pinch harmonic, like some Zakk Wylde would do. Right. Playing. So, fantastic.
Talented. Very talented. Let me ask you, too, real quick, in the last few minutes that we got. How often does certain conditions that might, because you were talking about like the limited breathing, like say somebody who has say a sleep apnea machine or ties in with some sort of has to have some sort of like a CPAP or something like that. Does any of that tie in with these experiences? Do people that have those experiences, once they use certain type of devices like that, see a decrease in that, or is there any sort of correlation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So people that have obstructive sleep apnea, they are more prone to get any of the sleep disorders, because what happens in sleep apnea is you stop breathing, which disrupts your sleep, and you end up not getting as deep a sleep as you'd like, and you wake up more times during the night than you would otherwise. I've actually got sleep apnea.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm super skinny, but I've got bad genetics. So all the males in my family have sleep apnea, and I'm stuck with it too. So if you use the CPAP machine or you use any of the devices, the mouth guards and stuff to open up your airway, you're going to actually make it less likely to get sleep paralysis. But yeah, you see that in a lot of folks. You see pretty much any kind of weird sleep disorder would be more likely if you've got apnea, or if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not sleeping well. One of the quickest ways, if you have listeners that have sleep paralysis, one of the easiest things to do is to go to bed and get up at the same time every day, whether it's the weekend, whether you're on a vacation, but just do your best to go to bed and get up the same time, and to not sleep on your back. Try to sleep on your side. The majority of sleep paralysis episodes happen when people are sleeping in what's called the supine position, so they're sleeping on their back. So if you got a little bit extra weight, that will make you have more pressure on your chest, which will make it more likely that you get disturbed sleep, which will make it more likely that you have sleep paralysis. So if you're lucky enough to have somebody sleeping next to you, you can tell them too. So when you go on your back, they can maybe nudge you over onto your side, so you're less likely to have sleep paralysis. This rich guy that I wrote about in the first book, he actually paid his manservant to watch him while he slept, so that when he would actually, his eyes would pop open, but he wasn't able to move, he could be woken up. So people have gone to pretty extreme lengths to have their sleep paralysis go away, or to stop it as soon as they can.
Well, what was the quote from the old Mel Brooks movie? It's good to be the king. Get you a manservant. There it is.
It's good to be the king.
I won't have to get
yourself a manservant.
I won't have to use my apnea machine anymore. Well, let me ask you this. We've probably got about 2 minutes in this, and there's so much more I want to ask you. Is it a possibility to maybe be able to have you on the show again sometime? I know you're a very busy guy.
Yeah, sure. I don't mind talking about this stuff. And if you plug my books, that helps too.
Always,
so, yeah.
any links you can send me or whatever, I'm more glad to do any of that. And I always try to share this all over the place, because I'm a part of a whole lot of different groups and pages and whatnot, and they're usually pretty good about, I don't do a lot of spamming and stuff, but they've been very understanding and good in helping me carry this sort of stuff. So
it's always got to get the word out. I can't tell you how many people, once I describe this, they're like, oh my God, I had no idea that other people had it too. I'm glad I'm not going crazy. So it's good to get the word out.
See, and that's the thing, you're doing good work, Oh,
thanks.
So
you are too. You're getting the word out here too.
Well, I'm trying.
I don't have a radio show.
Well, not yet. Now I'd listen to it too. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And if you want to hang on for a second, I will talk to you in just 1 second after the outro. And I want to thank you again, Doctor, for being here. It was a real pleasure.
My pleasure. It's been fun. Thanks.
All right, everybody. I want you to have a great rest of the weekend. Go out there and enjoy the rest of your day. But as the day draws short and the shadows grow long, make sure to check under your bed and your closet. Maybe there's some little pan in there, a little boogie, or maybe you left your sleep apnea machine on. But until next time, love each other, love yourselves, enjoy the best of life, but don't be afraid to let yourself get a little scared. So until next time, Stay scared, everybody, and take care.